Hey guys, it's Lotus and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to continue on with our read-along of Erha. Let's jump right into it. Chapter 116, Shizun meets Rongju. The moment Chuaning saw light gathering in the Ghost King's hand, he immediately shoved Maran and said, "Run!" There was no need to tell him twice. Maran grabbed Chuaning's elbow and they fled towards the palace doors, leaping and bounding through the air. As they ran, Maran cursed. "Master Huaizui's spell is too useless! How could he have left me with a shadow, letting people see through me?" For some reason, even though he was hearing his own disciple curse his own master, Chuaning barely showed any reaction and only threw Maran a glance. He looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end, nothing left his lips.
"Trying to escape?" the fourth Ghost King snorted. "As if I'd let you off that easy!"
They were both experts at Qinggong, and seeing the palace doors about to completely close, they stepped onto the wall, leaping off. But at that same moment, the fourth Ghost King summoned lightning into his palm. With a swing of his hands, thunder roared in the skies, and lightning crashed down upon the palace doors. In a split second, the palace walls that were only 10 meters high before shot up into the sky, extending so high that they looked like they were about to connect to the heavens. And the palace doors were also rapidly shutting, locking them in from all around. Maran cursed under his breath and dragged Chuaning along with him as they turned and ran in another direction. If they couldn't exit through the palace doors, then they'd leave it for now. The priority was to avoid getting captured by the fourth Ghost King. But this just so happened to be the right move. Every king of the Ghost Realm had their own expertise as well as their own shortcomings. While the fourth Ghost King was powerful in spells, after thousands of years of debauched indulgence, his physical condition really couldn't be compared to the others. Never mind running a mile, just 50 steps and he'd be gasping for breath. The fourth Ghost King had lazed about for thousands of years, holding fast to the principle of lying down if he didn't need to sit, and sitting down if he didn't need to stand. After so long, he'd long lazed himself to the point that his Qinggong was trash. His outrage grew as he watched Chuaning and Maran run further and further away. However, because he'd often gone to the other kings' domains in hell to gather up beauties, his relationship with the other 8 kings was considerably not great. So even when something like this happened, he was reluctant to inform the other kings in order to work together to capture them.
"So what if you can run fast? This king may be full-bellied, but there's still no escaping my grasp."
The fourth Ghost King rubbed at his belly, angry and aggrieved. He turned and saw the 8 staunch men who had been holding him up on their shoulders standing there, unmoving, and became even more displeased.
"What are you all standing around for? This king's legs are precious, not meant to give chase. But why aren't any of you giving chase?" ... This fourth Ghost King was said to have been a handsome man when he was skinny, but because he'd been deprived of mortal pleasures for too long, once he cultivated a flesh body, he overindulged in food and drink. He ate while sitting, ate while walking, ate while crouching. Even at Hell's busiest times, when he had to rush out appeals and didn't even have enough time to write, he still needed attendants at either side, not to flatten papers or grind ink, but to slice fresh fruit and feed him pastries. Just like that, a perfectly fine and peerless beauty forcibly stuffed himself into a fatty. Although his foundation was excellent, and no matter how much he ate his size wouldn't go overboard, his appearance had still changed. After that, the fourth Ghost King had ordered for all the mirrors of the Away Palace to be thrown out, and he hated hearing the words fat or obese. Rumor had it that there had been once a pretty attending mistress who had been singing him songs, but the first 3 lines of the lyrics had been, "Half crescent moon, half crescent moon, half crescent." Before the last moon had even left her lips, the fourth Ghost King had booted her out with a kick to the chest, yelling, "Fat, fat, fat! I allowed 2 fats, but it's not enough. You were still going for a 3rd. Don't think by breaking the word down, this king will understand you're beating around the bush and disparaging me. The audacity!"
Which was why, even though these ghost men were staunch and hardy, they didn't dare go after Chuaning and Maran. Each of them bowed their heads low, letting the fourth Ghost King complain and vent. In the end, one, more clever than the others, spoke up. "My king is so agile. How can we possibly catch up to people my king can't chase down?" Only then did the fourth Ghost King huff out a breath and let the chase go altogether. He turned to his subordinates saying,
That's true. Good that you are all self-aware. Very well, leave it be. Go pass on this king's command. All the doors of the away palace are to be shut. The palace walls be covered in sealing spells. Not a single fly shall be let out of this place."
He hissed then, finally spat out the grape seed sitting in his mouth, muttering threateningly,
"I'd sure like to see where the two of them can run off to."
Moran and Chuaning were both agile, plus the interior of the palace was full of twists and turns, so it didn't take long before they ditched the ghost wards chasing after them. The two hid in a narrow, dark little alley. Chuaning was a ghost, so no matter how long they ran, he wouldn't get tired. Moran, however, was of mortal flesh, and he leaned against the wall, panting. Chuaning glanced out and said somberly, "He's completely sealed the palace." Moran, still catching his breath, waved his hand. "It's fine, Shizun. Come into the soul-calling lantern. This way we can both return directly to the mortal realm. He won't be able to stop us for sure." Chuaning gave a small nod, but for some reason there was still worry coloring his brows. Moran didn't notice. He took out the soul-calling lantern and silently recited the spell. However, the golden light only flickered a few times before it completely extinguished. Chuaning's earth soul still stood before him, perfectly fine, entirely unmoved. What's going on?" Moran was shocked. "Why isn't it working?" The glumness between Chuaning's brows were even more evident now, and he sighed. "Just as I thought, the deliverance spell doesn't work here. We'll probably have to leave the palace before we can use the spell to return to the mortal realm." ... Hearing this, Moran bit his lip, a stubborn look in his eyes. It took a moment before he said, voice hoarse, "I'll get you out of here no matter what." Chuaning gave him a look before replying, "We'll need to hurry. The palace is massive and it won't be easy for the ghost pawns to find you, but there's no food or water here. I'll be fine, but you won't last for long." Moran smiled. "Hunger I can endure. I grew up with it, so I'm used to it." After recovering for a while, waiting till their surroundings had quieted down, the two eventually came out of the alleyway. The watery, cool moonlight fell upon their figures, one with a shadow, one without, as they walked side by side down the long, empty bluestone street. "Shizun," Moran called out, ... "I offended you earlier, at the gate. Sorry." Chuaning seemed caught off guard for a moment, then he cast his eyes down, long lashes lowering over his gaze. "It's fine." "Because of the circumstances, my words were also offensive. I'm sorry about that too." Chuaning, ... "It was also incredibly improper of me to say that we were already married. I'm sorry again." Chuaning suddenly stopped in his tracks and replied, voice frosty, "How long are you going to keep saying I'm sorry for? Don't you know how to say anything else?" "Something else?" Moran's heart started to race. He thought very hard for a moment, then very carefully tried changing his vocabulary. "Then, I apologize?" ... Chuaning shook out his sleeves and left. This pitiful Moran had absolutely no idea what he'd said to make him unhappy. He was worried he'd further irritated his Shizun, but also afraid that if he said more, he would get even more annoyed. So he scratched his head where he stood and followed after obediently. "Oh, Moran, you dummy!" Moran is apologizing because he felt it was improper to tell others that Chuaning was married, let alone married to him. But Chuaning is mad because Moran seems to be taking his words back, and Chuaning is offended, like, "So you didn't mean what you said? You didn't mean about us getting married?" So, of course, there's still gonna be misunderstandings between the two. "Shizun." Walking halfway, Moran asked in spite of himself, "Have you ever been through any karmic events?" Chuaning stopped and turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "I found another earth soul of yours in the underworld, which means you have one extra piece of soul more than everyone else. Earlier, I met Shushun at Tailwind Hall and asked him about it. He said that the extra piece of soul shouldn't have been something that you originally possessed." Moran continued hesitantly, "But, including the body in the mortal realm, I have definitely seen 4 of Shizun, so I was thinking, if Shizun's formed any bonds of fate in the past." Chuaning was silent for a while. There was a light in the depths of his eyes, like he'd thought of something, but then he closed his eyes and said, "I don't think I have." He paused for a moment, then, hesitant and a little confused, asked, I really have 4 souls?
Yeah. ...
Chuaning didn't know why that would be either. He thought it over for a while, contemplating, then sighed. This isn't something I can answer, and it doesn't affect anything, so let's just let it go. The two continued to carefully follow along remote little paths while inspecting the spiritual strength of the spell the 4th Ghost King had used to seal up the entire Away Palace. All barriers have a weakness, Chuaning said as they came before a watchtower. His fingers brushed over the rough walls, over which blue light flowed intermittently. He closed his eyes, trying to capture the flow of the energy streaming beneath the stones. However, he didn't have any spiritual power at the moment, and trying to sense out the feeling drained him. After a moment, Chuaning dropped his hand and shook his head dejectedly. My soul isn't whole and my powers are impaired, so I don't know how to break through this for the moment.
Why doesn't Shizun teach me, and I can try? Moran suggested.
It won't do. The art of barriers is complex. It's not something one can learn in a day or two.
Then what are the typical weak points of spiritual barriers? Moran asked. Why don't we try them one by one?
Every barrier has its own weakness. There isn't one-size-fits-all method to breaking them. If we're going to test them one by one, I really don't know how long that would take.
How would we know if we don't try? Moran smiled. Maybe I'll get really lucky.
Chuaning opened his mouth, about to reply, when at the periphery of his vision, he spotted a moving white shadow. His brows immediately furrowed, and he extended his hand, moving out of habit to summon Tianwen, but nothing happened. His expression darkened, unconsciously, and he yelled sharply, "Who's there?" That white shadow immediately tried to flee. As if Moran would let that happen, he darted over and in a ferocious instant had the ghost captured in his arms. He smothered the ghost's mouth and nose, preventing it from calling out, then twisted its arms behind its back, pushing it to kneel on the ground. When he focused and saw who it was, he couldn't help but burst out in anger.
Rongju!
The young man kneeling on the ground was tender and fair, like willow vines drifting in the breeze, but his eyes brimmed with a trace of unwillingness. He twisted his head back, not uttering a single word. Moran said angrily, "Are you off the snitch again? You really think I won't kill you?" Chuaning walked over. He had never met Rongju before, and after glancing him over, asked Moran, "You know him?" Moran didn't know what to say. He thought to himself about those 2 crimes of stealing and debauchery he'd committed back then, the ones that Chuaning had publicly put him in for trial for upon the platform of sin and virtue. At that time, he'd only thought Chuaning to be cruel and malicious, and his heart had been steeped in hatred for the man. To have this old history once more thrust in their faces made Moran want to find a hole to crawl into and hide. Chuaning didn't notice anything off, however, and only took this person as an acquaintance of Moran's. "Since he's followed you all the way here, then don't leave him behind in this place. Once we found a way to get out, let's bring him along with us." As he spoke, he took a careful look over Rongju. A perfectly decent person. Reincarnation should be top priority. Moran, ... Upon hearing these words, Rongju, who had initially been panicking a little, was at first taken aback, but then he suddenly smiled. His eyes softened into a gentle and charming gaze as he glanced over at Moran. "This must be Shizun then."
"What Shizun? Who said you can call him Shizun?" Moran said angrily. "He's my Shizun!"
Rongju still harbored some resentment against him, so he replied languidly, purposely trying to infuriate him. "Oh, I see. My Shizun then.
You!"
With this back and forth, Chuaning finally detected something amiss. He asked, "Moran, are there some hard feelings between the two of you?" Rongju replied smiling. "Good Shizun, don't be angry with him. There are no hard feelings between us, just some old relations." The way he'd said it was ambiguous, but his tone was extremely affectionate. Chuaning didn't say anything, but his eyes narrowed and his lips slowly thinned. At first glance, his expression was as indifferent as ever. But the gloominess between his brows could not be fully concealed. Rongju had grown up in a whorehouse and was an expert in reading expressions. How could Chuaning, with his pure personality and naivety, hide the emotion flickering in his eyes from Rongju? So Chuaning is jealous. Rongju was a bit shocked. He'd originally thought Moran a sleazy philanderer, audaciously in love with his own Shizun. Yet, unexpectedly, now that he'd met the Shizun in question, it didn't seem one-sided. How filthy this xianxia. Even though he was in a dire situation right now, Rongju still couldn't help but sigh, feeling both disgusted and amazed. In the cultivation realm, dual cultivation between men wasn't anything unheard of, but it was nonetheless considered unseemly. As the gungzi of xianxia, if Maran actually got together with his benefacting mentor and word of this got out, sect leader Shui Zhengyang would have nowhere to hide his face. Rongju blinked his charming and affectionate peach blossom eyes, sizing Chuaning up. He was just about to say a few more words, ready to add oil to the flames, but the other man spoke up first. You're dead as you can be. What old relations are there to speak of? Well, wasn't Xianjun the one who asked me? Rongju chuckled. I was just answering honestly. Who asked you? Chuaning said coldly. I've been directing my questions to him from the start. Cat fight. Of course, there wasn't any need to clarify who him was. His tone was also laced with sparks. His intent for Rongju to draw clear their relationship could not have been any more obvious. Hearing Chuaning siding with him, Maran's heart swelled, warmth blooming in his chest. He wanted to say something, but before he could get closer to the other man, Chuaning had already turned around in anger. Deal with this yourself. But Maran himself didn't actually know what to do. If he were to let Rongju go, there was a chance Rongju would turn around and trip them up, rat on them. But keeping Rongju with them would be like carrying around a barrel of gunpowder. If Rongju were to say something he shouldn't, Chuaning just might choke to death. As Maran agonized over this, Chuaning went to inspect the fourth Ghost King's barrier once more. Taking advantage of this, Maran yanked Rongju by the collar and gritted out, keeping his voice hushed. Just what do you want? I'm just irked and upset. Rongju's thick lashes carefully flickered, a small light shimmering within his gaze. I just can't stand that a villain like you gets a do-over. But Maran knew just what kind of person Rongju was. He wasn't the kind of person who would do something that would harm both others and himself. He'd only ever do things that harm others and benefit himself. No matter how resentful he was, what mattered most to him was spending his days in comfort. There was no reason for him to risk death in order to follow them. His eyes swept over the other man and landed on Rongju's feet. There was only one shoe on those delicate and fair feet. The other foot was bare and smeared with mud, obviously the result of having fled in a hurry. Maran narrowed his eyes. Tell me the truth. Rongju. Didn't I already tell you? The truth is I can't stand... If you plan on lying to blackmail me again, I will immediately blind your eyes, block your mouth, and throw you down a well. You're already a ghost, so you won't die from hunger, nor will you be able to escape. If you're lucky, the patrol will find you in a couple of days. If you're unlucky, then prepare yourself to be stuck in that well for 8 to 10 years. Maran paused, then continued, voice very dark. Decide for yourself. As expected, Rongju's face changed colors. A moment later, he said, I changed my mind. I don't want to stay here. You have to take me out. What? Don't want to be a ghost husband anymore? ... Rongju bit his lip down tight, then angrily raised his head. I want to live a normal life too. I want another start. He breathed in deeply, then declared, I want reincarnation. Fine, then let me ask you another thing. Was it you who snitched to the patrol and told them where I was? ... Even if you keep quiet, I have ways to make you confess. A red light flickered in Maran's eyes, and he said, voice low and dark, Speak. Yes, I was the one who told, but so what? Rongju held his head high, his eyes shining with resentment. If I didn't tell them where to look, how would I have escaped? Maran flung his collar away from him, laughing through his rage. Well, you certainly know how to hit someone when they're down, I'll give you that. I'm good at slandering, too. Rongju slowly put himself back together, patting his robes back into place. He threw a look at Chuaning, standing not too far away. Mo Xianjun, you really care about that person, don't you? What do you think he'll do if I tell him, in full detail, and without exaggeration, how you used to fawn over me so indulgently? Uh-oh. End of chapter. Author's notes. Light a sympathetic candle for the fourth Ghost King, who had everything ruined for him once he got fat, lol.
Meatbun is savage. Oh my gosh.
Okay, so to recap chapter 116, they managed to run away, and the fourth Ghost King is too tired and too heavy to chase after them, so he decides to just order his guards to just close all the gates and seal up everything, seal up the away palace, but he's not actively searching for them right now. And Moran and Chuaning bump into Rongju, and it turns out Rongju is the one that ratted out their location. So Moran doesn't know whether he wants to strangle Rongju or take him along. Chuaning at first thinks Rongju is just a friend of Moran's, but then finds out that Rongju and Moran had some intimate relations in the past. So Chuaning suddenly changes his demeanor and is very catty and bratty when dealing with Rongju now. So Chuaning wants Rongju gone, Moran wants Rongju gone. Rongju is just like clutching onto them and doesn't want to let go of them. He's like, this is my ticket out of the underworld, I want to reincarnate. Now, will Moran and Chuaning take him along, or will they abandon him? We'll find out in the next chapter. Let's keep reading. Chapter 117. Shizun tells me to get the hell out. Oh no. It looks like Chuaning is really jealous. What Rongju meant to say, of course, was that Chuaning would definitely get upset and jealous, that he wouldn't be able to handle it. But Moran didn't know that Chuaning had actually loved him all along. He mulled over Rongju's words and only thought that he was threatening to tell Chuaning about his past misdeeds. For a master to have to listen to all of his disciples' many outrageous acts, recounted one by one, how mortifying would that be? Wouldn't he die of anger? So he snapped immediately, "You leave him alone!" Rongju smiled coquettishly, beautifully effeminate despite being a man. He said softly, "I'll behave if you protect me and take me with you. Promise I won't say anything or make any trouble." With no other choice, Moran cursed under his breath and turned to leave. Rongju followed after gleefully, knowing it for the silent acquiescence that it was. But Moran barely went 2 steps before he whipped his head around and pointed a finger at him, whispering low and threatening, "Rongju, if you so much as put a single toe out of line, I'll make sure to scatter your soul before you can even touch the gate of reincarnation. Capiche?" Rongju was a picture of affected coyness as he said sweetly, "If you don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. I'll behave as long as you don't mistreat me. Mo Xianjun, shouldn't you of all people know what kind of person I am? You're my old regular after all." ... Moran was as disgusted by that soft, saccharine tone of his now as he had been fond of in the past life. But there was absolutely nothing he could do about it as he watched Rongju drift over to Chuaning's side. He really couldn't understand it. Had he been blind back then or what? Song Chu Tong, Rongju, how the hell had he managed to fall for people like them? If he could be reborn into his past life in front of his past self, he'd really like to grab Ta Xinjun by the neck and open his head up, check just how much water had gotten in there. Seriously, what the hell was all this? Luckily, Rongju hadn't said anything outright earlier, and Chuaning was basically a blank sheet in matters of the heart. So after some words of explanation smilingly delivered by seasoned veteran Rongju, Chuaning's tightly furrowed brows gradually relaxed. He even thought that he was the one with the impure thoughts, to have misunderstood what this person meant by old relations earlier. He secretly felt rather embarrassed about it, though his expression remained unchanged. Okay, so it looks like Rongju kind of saved Moran's neck there. He explained to Chuaning that, "Oh, there's nothing improper that happened between us. Don't worry about it. We're just old acquaintances, just old friends, nothing to worry about." So he quelled Chuaning's jealousy for the moment. Rongju had to work if he was going to tag along. Being the one most familiar with the palace, he said, "Not many people frequent this street, but it's not exactly hidden. Let's go to another place for peace of mind while you two figure out how to break through the barrier." This other place he mentioned was a storehouse for clothing and fabrics in the underworld, with bolts upon bolts of white burlap cloth piled high, perfect for hiding it out. The three of them picked a remote location, and Chuaning felt along the wall with his fingertips as if taking a patient's pulse, trying his best to feel out the spiritual barrier currently covering the entire away palace. But a long while passed and he was still getting nowhere, while his soul grew weaker for his efforts. Moran put his hand over Chuaning's, tugging it off the wall, and said, "Get some rest." Angry and helpless, Chuaning only could seethe as he stared at his own hand. Why is this soul of mine missing spiritual powers of all things?
What if I give you some of mine?
I wouldn't be able to use it. Chuaning glanced at Rongju off in the distance and lowered his voice. You're a living person. I'm a ghost. Yin and yang energies are dissonant. Chuaning was back on it after a short break. If he had his 3 souls and his spiritual powers, then all it would have taken was to send a burst of spiritual energy into the barrier, and he would have easily been able to pinpoint the weakness in the 4th Ghost King's spell. But right now, he hardly had any spiritual energy at all, and it was truly too difficult to try and seek out the weakness by forcing what tiny bit of it he had into the barrier, like looking for a single leaf in the vast ocean. 2 hours passed, and Rongju started getting restless. He ran over and pulled at Moran. Can we get out or not?
Moran said, knock it off and go sit down.
Come on, I'm worried sick already. Just tell me if we can get out or not.
Worrying won't do you any good. Just wait.
Rongju complained.
Isn't your Shizun supposed to be really powerful? It's been so long already. Why isn't anything happening? He only has 1 of 3 souls, and this was missing spiritual powers. Can you just be quiet?
Rongju seemed dejected at his words, eyelashes flickering as he sat back down on the pile of white burlap cloth. Another 2 hours and then some passed. Rongju got up and walked over to Chuaning.
Xianjun, is there any other way?
Fingertips still pressed against the wall, Chuaning replied without opening his eyes. No.
Then is there some way to get at least some amount of your powers back?
Chuaning thought about it for a moment before asking, do you have any spiritual energy?
No.
Rongju was taken aback.
Why does Xianjun ask?
If you did, you could have passed me some to use.
Rongju said excitedly. That easy? Then hurry and have Mo Xianjun.
Chuaning cut him off. He is useless. Of course, Rongju didn't know that Moran wasn't actually a ghost. His smile froze as soon as he heard that Moran couldn't be used.
How come?
Different elements is all. Moran knew that Chuaning was not good at lying, and it'd be best not to let Rongju know the truth about him not being a ghost, so he cut him off immediately. Can you please just go keep watch outside and let us know if you see anyone coming this way? Rongju shot him an irate glare, but the 3 of them were stuck in the same boat right now, so he could only begrudgingly go over to the storehouse entrance and reluctantly lean against the door, picking at his nails while glancing about outside with that pair of hazy peach blossom eyes. Moran glanced over at him while sitting down next to Chuaning. He hesitated for a while, but in the end decided he didn't want to keep anything from Chuaning, so he spoke up.
Shizun, I want to apologize for some wrongs I've committed.
What wrongs?
Do you remember that time when you had me reprimanded at the platform of sin and virtue for...
Moran paused, too embarrassed to say debauchery. A person's face really was quite the mysterious thing, thick like the Great Wall when they didn't care, thin like a sheet of paper, and just as flimsy as soon as it began to care. Moran lowered his head bashfully and said in a small voice,
For breaking the 4th, 9th, and 15th commandments.
The 4th commandment, thievery. The 9th commandment, debauchery. The 15th commandment, deceit. Of course, Chuaning wouldn't forget that time. His eyes opened, but he didn't look at Moran as he muttered, Looking at that cool, disciplined expression, Moran felt even more ashamed, dropping his gaze after a moment and quietly whispering,
Shizun, I'm sorry.
Chuaning could already guess what he was going to say. Although aggrieved, he had always been able to keep a level head during difficult situations. And besides, it wasn't like he was just now finding out about the sleazy things Moran had done back then, so he replied coolly, Weren't you already punished for that? And there were no repeat offenses after that either, so why bring it up now?
Because that Rongju outside, he's...
Moran couldn't finish the sentence, and Chuaning was also silent for a long while. Then Moran heard Chuaning scoff. So it's him.
Yeah.
He didn't dare look up at Chuaning at all. Sisheng Peak never forbade his disciples from matters of desire, and young people dual cultivating or having a lover on the outside was perfectly normal and ordinary. But Chuaning was different. Chuaning's cultivation path focused on purity of heart and mind, and he had always treated such carnal things with contempt. Not to mention, Moran had slept around in the brothels back then instead of properly seeing someone like a normal person would. Xue Zhengyang might not have cared much with the way he spoiled his nephew. Moran was already of age anyway, and it wasn't like he cultivated the purity path. Moreover, it wouldn't be healthy to suppress those needs, so he could only close one eye and let it go. But Chuaning wouldn't be able to tolerate it. He'd be disgusted. Moran had already seen such a reaction back when he was being punished at the platform of sin and virtue. In Chuaning's eyes back then, he had clearly seen disgust, contempt, and loathing. It's already been so many years, and he hadn't done those things again since. But now that Chuaning had run into Rongju in the underworld, how could he possibly not be bothered? Moran truly felt the weight of the words, what goes around comes around. It's just a matter of time now. He wasn't afraid of being scolded or hit by Chuaning. In fact, he'd rather he just take out Tianwen and give him another round of lashing, just as long as nothing went awry, as long as the earth soul that he had gone so much to find didn't run off in a huff over this past affair. If Chuaning were to leave in a fit of rage, Moran might really kill himself. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. Rather than keeping Rongju around like a barrel of gunpowder on legs, it'd be better to just come clean himself and go apologize to Chuaning first. He had it all planned out, deliberately standing in the direction of the door as he confessed, so that if Chuaning tried to leave after hearing what he had said, he would be able to grab him, tie him up if he had to, whatever offense he had to resort to keep him from disappearing and leaving him behind. Chuaning could be as mad as he wanted after this was all over. Moran was practicing how to block off Chuaning's escape routes in his head when the fabric of Chuaning's robes shifted slightly in the dim lighting, light catching on scarlet silk and golden embroidery. Even Moran's heart was trembling as he said in a small voice, "Shizun." Chuaning said, "This is all ancient history, and punishment's already been dealt out. So why are you telling me these bygones for?" He gave a sidelong glance, expression coolly indifferent as his thin lips parted deliberately, even a touch sardonically. "What do I care?" Something like, "What do I care?" was the last thing he had expected him to say. Moran was dumbstruck. He didn't taste any of the vinegar dripping from Chuaning's words. All he felt was panic, thinking that Shizun had lost all hope in him and didn't want to bother with him anymore, didn't care about him anymore. He said frantically, "Shizun, everything in the past was all my fault. Please don't be mad." Why would I be mad? What is there to be mad about? Despite his words, the more he thought about it, the more irritated he felt, until Chuaning snapped heatedly, "I just knew things weren't so clean between the two of you. Old relations indeed. You are still trying to fool me? Get out. ... Out!" He was well aware of the sourness in his voice, and he well knew that this was all in the past already, but Chuaning couldn't help muttering under his breath, "Absolutely shameless." Instead of getting out, Moran only continued to sit there dumbly next to him, staring insistently at him with that pair of bright black eyes. A moment later he said, "I'm not leaving." Chuaning said, incensed, "Leave. I don't want to see you right now." "I'm not leaving," Moran mumbled, sitting there refusing to budge, like a stupid piece of rock. He was such a despicable person, but as he stared at Chuaning and the rims of his eyes grew red, there was somehow also a bit of pitifulness and stubbornness there. "I'm afraid that if I go, you'll run off. Shizun, don't leave me behind." ... Chuaning had no idea that this was what had been on Moran's mind. Although he felt revolted every time this thing got brought up, it wasn't news to him, and he was also aware of the prevailing normal practice in the cultivation world, be it men or women, once they came of age, provided their cultivation path was not that of purity. Practically everyone indulged in some amount of dissolution. It was nothing to raise one's eyebrows at. Moran was no Xuemeng. Xuemeng had grown up sheltered and coddled, with upstanding parents and a strict education, so he'd always been well-behaved unlike other young masters. But Moran? A willful personality, always doing whatever he felt like, grew up in the pleasure houses, no father and a songstress for a mother. He was a wild, unruly pup that had grown up without guidance, screwing around day in day out, all the way until he was 15 before his uncle plucked him from the mire, fur covered in mud. Only an idiot would think he was clean and pure like a fine piece of jade. Chuaning was no idiot. It was one thing knowing all that, but seeing Rongju with his own eyes, this beautiful person who had slept around with Moran back then, Chuaning was still grossed out. Unable to make Moran go away, he turned back to the wall, closed his eyes, and went back to checking the barrier. But as he worked, he just couldn't help thinking about Rongju's pretty little oval-shaped face, that fair, tender-looking skin that was probably soft and smooth to the touch, and those cute little lips, light pink and smooth-talking. That damned Moran had definitely kissed them before, and that little waist, that figure. And, in spite of himself, he even thought about how Moran might have been all tangled up in bed with that effeminate little thing. How repulsive. When it came to certain things, hearing about it was an altogether different matter than having to see it for oneself. He couldn't help thinking about it now that he had seen, and the more he thought about it, the less he could stand for it. Chuaning's eyes suddenly snapped open, flames of anger blazing within. He stood up and shoved Moran away none too gently. Get the hell out.
Shizun!
Out! Left without a choice, Moran could only lower his head and slowly walk outside the storehouse. Rongju was a little surprised to see him there. Oh, Mo Xianjun, did you have a fight with your Shizun? Moran didn't even want to acknowledge him. Just the sight of him gave him a headache. He had liked him in the past life because he looked a bit like Shimei, and when he had slept with him after his rebirth in this life, it was a grudge and the intention of screwing him over. But no matter what, the things he had done in the past were like marks carved into a wooden post, impossible to restore to the way they used to be. Moran said, I'll keep watch by myself. Go find somewhere else to sit. The door was the least safe place in the storehouse, and Rongju was only too happy to comply. But he couldn't resist looking back at Moran after walking only 2 steps away. He was suddenly a little curious how Moran had died. How did his personality change this much in the few years he hadn't seen him? It was as if he had gone through some kind of harrowing experience. How very curious. Pretty eyelashes fluttering, he glanced Moran up and down from where he stood behind him. Suddenly feeling like something was a little off, he looked him over again, more carefully this time, and his gaze landed on the faint shadow at Moran's feet. Rongju froze in shock. End of chapter 117. Oh, the secret is out. Okay, so to recap, Moran and Chuaning and Rongju are all going together. They're hiding out at a storehouse, and Chuaning is trying to break the barrier, but because he has no spiritual energy, because he's a ghost, it's taking a lot longer than anticipated. Unfortunately, since Moran is still alive, he can't share some of his spiritual power with Chuaning, and because Rongju isn't a cultivator, he can't share his wood elemental essence either. So Chuaning is on his own right now and is taking hours upon hours. And while he's sitting there trying to figure out a weakness in the barrier, he's stewing over the fact that Moran and Rongju indeed had a relationship. Moran was feeling guilty, and so he actually came clean and told Chuaning that yes, he did have some intimate relations with Rongju. And of course, Chuaning drank a whole pot of vinegar, is super jealous, and is telling Moran to just go away, get out. Moran is panicking because he doesn't want Chuaning to abandon him, so he's like on his knees apologizing and pleading for Chuaning to please forgive him. Chuaning is just disgusted and also really, really jealous and angry and envious of Rongju. He's thinking about how Rongju is pretty and soft and probably Moran's type, and then he's comparing it to himself, who is probably not Moran's type, which is false because Chuaning is definitely Moran's type. So again, we have misunderstandings there, but a lot more comedic and lighthearted compared to the other misunderstandings that we've seen in the past. I'm glad that Moran is taking some of the heat. He doesn't realize he's a little dense. He doesn't realize that Chuaning is mad at him, not because he indulged in debauchery, but because Chuaning is actually jealous. So can you imagine how over the moon he will be when he finds out that Chuaning was actually jealous of Rongju? I can't wait to see when that happens. But yeah, so at the end of the chapter, Rongju finds out that Moran has a shadow, which means that Moran is alive. What is Rongju gonna do with that information? Is he gonna turn Moran in? Is he gonna rat them out to save his own hide? Or will he keep it a secret? We'll have to find out in the next read-along, but until then, I hope you guys enjoyed today's read-along, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!